Hey, Being at Work listeners, welcome back. This is your host, Andrea Butcher, and wow, I'm so grateful for this conversation today. It's the first time we've talked about neurodiversity at work, and it's such an important topic with so many good takeaways. But I want to start with a stat. Did you know that 1 in 56 children and 1 in 42 boys are diagnosed with some sort of neurodiversity? So given that, no doubt, neurodiversity affects everyone in your organization in some way. So let's lean into this conversation today. But first, I want to tell you about our guest because she is the primary reason that the topic carries so much weight for me. I've had the pleasure of knowing and seeing today's guest in action over the last few years, and she's one of those leaders who's perpetually looking for opportunities to lift others. I mean, she is uncanny in her ability to encourage the hearts of the people in her life. She meets people where they are, wherever they are, and she is using this gift to create awareness of the importance of embracing neurodiversity at work. Amanda Gioia is the Vice President of Technology Risk, Communications, and Partnerships at MasterCard. And she launched a business resource group in 2016. And today, there are 14 chapters globally and over 1,000 employees across MasterCard involved in this charge. I mean, it's such a cool example of ever expanding influence when you're passionate and care about something. So listen in as we talk about why it's important to embrace neurodiversity at work. We'll also explore Amanda's personal journey for this mission, and we'll highlight the specific leadership characteristics to support neurodiverse employees. My biggest takeaway, normal is just a setting on the dryer. Check it out.
I spent the majority of my career in communications. And when I was about 29, which was just a few years ago, had my son, who is all things amazing and fabulous. And we noticed, as he was quite young, maybe some communication difficulties with him. And so we talked to his pediatrician, and he referred us for a consultation for an autism diagnosis, which felt like hard, you know. We weren't sure what to do with it, but, we said, let's figure out what he needs to be the best version of himself, right? This is just one aspect of who he is and not something that defines him. So long story short, he did get an autism diagnosis around the age of 2. And we navigated kind of the journey. So what does that mean? What support does he need? What therapies does he need? How do we make sure that he's getting reinforcement and all of the things that he needs to be the best version of himself? So that worked for a while. And then we hit middle school, which, is one of those kind of inflection points for kiddos. And things got harder for him socially. And I think he would say that now. And I will say that, every time I have an opportunity to talk about him, I always make sure he's okay with me doing that, because you have to honor the person. So he had a hard time, and we made sure to get him the help that he needed. And I was really lucky because I had a manager at the time who couldn't have been more supportive, right? When it came to needing to leave for a school meeting, needing to go to a therapist appointment, he was just like, whatever you need, because I know you're going to come back and do the work, and I'm not worried about your performance dropping or anything like that, because you care a lot about both of these things. And I was really lucky with that. And he said, and once you get this all worked out, you need to come back and figure out how you're going to help other people. And that's kind of where we landed with starting the ADAPT Employee Resource Group.
Had you expected that response from him? Once you get this figured out, you need to come back.
It felt, we like to joke sometimes that you're never given more than you can handle, but sometimes you wish people didn't trust you so much. He was always that kind of leader, and someone who was just always that kind of inspiring, right? To look at a situation and go, okay, what are you going to learn from this? And how are you going to make others better, more informed as a result of it. So it didn't surprise me, but it did kind of make me go, well, what does that look like?
So how long between that conversation and you launching the employee resource group?
Boy, it wasn't long, maybe a couple of months. Because once we got through the bumps of like figuring out the support and help that he needed, the first thing I wanted to do was make sure that nobody else had to go through bumps and figure out how do we start that conversation to really normalize talking about the fact that, everyone seems to be living their best life on on social media. But, there are times when we really struggle or we need help, and that's okay to ask for and create an environment where it's okay to talk about, hey, I might be struggling with this. Does anybody have any thoughts or ideas for me?
Well, and I suspect like that had to have been really helpful for you in your processing and your healing and your learning through that to be able to rally other people.
It was super, super, I think, therapeutic and welcoming, right? Because how it worked out was I went into my manager's office, who happened to be, a pretty high ranking person at the company. And I said, okay, I think I'm ready to do this. And he said, great, we'll announce it at the next town hall. And I said, the one in 3 days? Are you kidding? And he said, no, it'll be great. So I leaned to the next office over, who was a colleague of mine. And I said, hey, I'm going to probably need an executive sponsor on this one. Would you be? And he goes, yes. And I said, I haven't even asked you like the whole thing yet. And he goes, whatever you need. Yes, of course. I said, well, it's kind of leading this effort for the company. I don't know kind of what it's going to look like or how many people we're going to get, involved. And he said, let's see how it goes. So yeah, that gentleman, Edgar Aguilar, myself, stood up on stage and said, hey, we'd love to talk about this with people. We think this is a need, and we're going to do this meeting in one of the big conferences we had at work. And we hoped maybe we'd get 15 to 20 people. And boy, were we surprised. We got 88 people to come into the room and at least that many people online. So I think we struck a nerve.
No doubt. So you had a lot of support around you, a lot of encouragement around you, because you're still processing, what does this mean for me and my family? And clearly then there were a lot of other people. 88 people showed up to that first meeting. Clearly there was a need.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, like you said before, there's something therapeutic and a feeling maybe of inclusion that comes with people going, I've walked in your shoes. I know what you're dealing with, or I'm just starting this journey and I don't, what? What do I do?
Well, and there's such a leadership lesson in that. I have a friend that talks about like creating and leading from weakness. And I think so much of the time we're like, oh, I can't start something. I don't know what I'm doing. I think that's a great time to start something. I mean, because you're learning through it. No doubt your vulnerability was appealing and attractive, and I want to be a part of that.
We talked about that a lot, actually. We talk about it still in the Adaptive BRG as vulnerability being such an important leadership trait that is often overlooked, but should never be undervalued. When you can say, I don't have it 100% together all the time, and I do not have all the answers, but I'm definitely here to figure it out. There's such power in that because you open the door for people to say, my life's not perfect, but here's what I can share, here's what I know, and then who can help. Once you do that, people come to you, and it's such an opportunity, such a blessing, I think.
So what was the goal of the BRG? And so initially we both referred to it as an employee resource group, but it is a business resource group. And there's a reason why. So when Amanda and I say BRG, that's what we're referring to. So tell us about like, why is it a business resource group instead of an employee resource group? What's the difference? And what were your goals initially? What were you setting out to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you said the numbers before. So, 1 in 56, 1 in 42, we all know someone, right, who has some aspect of neurodiversity, whether it's your personal experience or you want to be an ally. You understand that different perspectives coming to the table make for better discussions and ultimately better products. So as we think about that from a business perspective, if everyone around the table looks and sounds like you, then you're going to get a product that serves just those people, or a solution that serves just those people. So thinking about it from a business perspective, we knew we had to start from education and inclusion, right? So let's talk about what it means to be neurodiverse. Let's talk about what that means from a manager perspective. What type of environment do you need for people to be successful? And then from there, you can build upon that and say, okay, so if we know that, what do we need to do to help everyone show up as their best, most authentic selves? And then how do we translate that into the work we do each day?
So what is neurodiversity? Like, how do you define it?
This is one of those things that if you ask one person, you get one definition. If you ask somebody else, you get another. It was really best explained to me, and this is maybe because I work in technology. It was best explained to me and really crystallized for me when I heard, it's like everyone's a PC, but you're a Mac. And you go, well, both of those things can achieve the same end goals. They just take different paths to get there. And so it's understanding, how does it done over here? How is it done over here? And how do those things come together to reach your goal?
And so providing education around that. I mean, and those numbers, 1 in 56, 1 in 42, fascinating. So no doubt, we are all affected by this. I mean, it is so important to understand it and to have greater awareness then around how we're interacting with and showing up with the people in our lives, because there's such opportunity.
I think so. But I don't know that it has to be such a huge lift, right? Because I think when people hear different, they go, the best managers, the ones who really, model the way for the rest of us, look at every employee that they have and say, how do I get the best out of them? What do they need for that to happen? And how do I move things out of their way so they can do their best work? And really, that's what we should all be doing as managers, right? So neurotypical, neurodiverse, doesn't matter, right? You may have to lean a little bit in more, as you would for any employee, by the way, at times. And then you may need to, of course, correct in a little direction. But that's what we should be doing as managers in the first place. So
it's a good point. It's what I hear you saying there is almost like, don't think about I got to be intentional with my neurodiverse employees. It's like, no, be intentional with your employees. And if you happen to uncover that, what tweaks or enhancements can you make to best support those individuals?
100%. If you ask an employee, what motivates you? What doesn't? How do you like to get feedback? How do you, ask those basic questions of, how am I going to make this relationship work and deliver the best, results? And those questions, if you care enough to ask, you better care enough to listen, and you better care enough to put it into practice, because that's really when the magic happens.
That's when the magic happens. Well, and it's really interesting as awareness has been enhanced. I mean, I can think of, just off the top of my head, 5 colleagues over the last few years who have been diagnosed with ADHD. And I keep hearing things like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have had this diagnosis earlier. It answers so many questions. It just makes me feel so much more normal and confident. And so how does these autism, ADHD, talk about how they all fit within neurodiversity? Give me a little bit more education around what all goes into that term.
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying I'm not a clinician. I'm not a medical professional or anything like that. I just, based on my own experience as a mom, as a person who has leaned in and wanted to educate myself, neurodiversity is just differences in the brain, differences in how you think, how you might approach things. And it's up to each one of us to kind of figure that out. And I'll give you a great example, right? I think my son was probably 5 or 6, and we were doing one of those checkups, that you do, the yearly checkups with a pediatrician. And, it got to the point in the appointment where the doctor, who was my pediatrician, by the way, so we had a long history with him, and he was very candid with me. So my son was, kind of walking across the room and just, bebopping to his own music and all of that. And I just said, oh my gosh, I just wish he could be normal. Right. And then I felt like this immediate sense of embarrassed because this is my kid, right? Whatever. Like if this is how he feels comfortable and that stuff is cool. But I guess such insights and wisdom from this pediatrician who had known at that point for like 4 years. And he said, Amanda, normal is just a setting on a dryer. Aren't we all different? Right? And like, how boring would life be if we were all the same? I mean, he will definitely march to his own beat, but the best people do.
Normal is just a setting on a dryer. I love that. And if you think about that example, like why do we think normal is sitting quietly in a chair? It's who's comfortable doing that? Like I am such an active, energetic person. Like I love movement and I'm so much more comfortable when I'm up and I'm standing and I'm moving or I'm swaying or yeah. Well, and it's which is I do appreciate the spectrum language. That helps because differences in the brain. I mean, every single one of us are somewhere on that spectrum. We all are different. Our brains are magnificent.
Yeah, and interesting and, bring different perspectives to the table. And I think that's what makes, a workplace or anything more interesting when you know this person isn't going to think exactly the same way I do. And that's okay. If we're trying to solve a business issue, if we're trying to solve, a challenge, we need different perspectives because we have different people that we're trying to address.
Well, and that's why getting back to business resource group, I mean, it's good for the business. Obviously, you're creating awareness, which is helpful for including employees, but ultimately the business benefits from that.
Yeah, I think if people feel included and they feel like it is okay to show up with, hey, I might not be the person in the meeting who is going to stand up and volunteer all of my ideas right away. But if you open a meeting, for example, and say, we're going to be thinking about this, and even like, I should even say before that, if you want to set up a brainstorming meeting, right, and you want to invite people with different perspectives, a great way to do that is to send a note to people saying, I'd like for us to think about X. Come prepared with your ideas on how to handle A, B, and C. And we'll be doing that in this meeting in 2 days a week. And give people the option of speaking up in that meeting, sending you ideas ahead of time, following up after that meeting, because everybody engages differently. But you have to meet them where they are, like you said earlier. Because the best ideas don't always come in those meetings. Sometimes they come from the conversation afterwards. Sometimes they come from engagement earlier or later.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. Well, so while you're talking more about little things leaders can do, I mean, you're talking there about creating an environment that's safe for people, like doing the things in advance that are going to help people with whatever it is we're doing. What else? What are other just little things leaders can do?
That's such a great question. I don't have all the answers, but I can say what works for me, right? And what I've seen work for the people that work for me. Always go to the meeting with an agenda. What are you trying to achieve? What are the roles that people have? And what do you expect to get out of it as a result? And one likes to have those meetings where you come in and you have no idea what the meeting's about, what the expectations are, and what they need to do as a result. So you really have to help kind of navigate that for them so that they can come up and do their best work.
Yeah. And so it's preparing. It's a lot of preparation, helping to answer those questions that are in their head.
Right. Because none of us like surprises in those sessions, right? You want to be able to show up and be your best self. And some people are really great at off the cuff thinking. But some people need a little bit more time and a little bit more reflection. So you have to enable both.
What are other strategies? Anything else come to mind? Simple things that leaders can do. Because it's interesting. I mean, once again, I want to say, like, these are just good leadership strategies. It's almost like creating an environment that embraces diversity. It's like it's just good leadership. Like, just go back to the basics.
Well, and I think that's such a great way to put it, right? Because you can look at this like it's hard and think, oh my gosh, it's too hard. I can't do it. Or you can go, this is important. I need to do it. I know I'm probably going to make a mistake or two, but my intention is to be more inclusive, to create a sense of not only inclusion, but belonging for individuals. And you do that by asking them what works for them, what doesn't work for them. Figure out, what makes it easy for them to do a good job and what makes it hard. And then really taking that into account as you work day to day.
That's so good. I so appreciate your point. Like, I'm going to make a mistake and it's going to be awkward. I'm going to be awkward. I think it's being comfortable with some of the discomfort that comes with putting ourselves out there and doing things different. And it is messy. I mean, we're talking about differences in preferences and the way in which we show up. So of course it's going to be awkward and messy. We're not going to get it right all the time.
But I think it's giving yourself the grace of learning, right? Because if people know you're going in with good intentions, it's easier to say, hey, I'm sure you didn't mean this when you said, X, but you should probably say it like Y, and here's why. Like, help people understand, and don't do it in a way that says, oh my God, I can't believe you did this, but, I know best of intentions here, but maybe next time try this. Go so much further, right? Think about how we all like to receive feedback. You don't like the sledgehammer of feedback. You like here's what you did, here's what I think you could do differently, and here's the benefit you'll get as a result.
Yeah, when you and I were talking recently, I was telling you how much I've really appreciated the show Love on the Spectrum because I've learned so much. And one of my takeaways watching that show, it's for listeners who don't know the show, it's a Netflix like docu series that follows autistic young adults who are navigating dating and relationships. And I appreciate how direct their communication is. Like, and that's what they expect. It's very literal. Like, tell me exactly. And I appreciate that. I mean, I think it's another good leadership takeaway for our teams. And it's consistent with what you were saying about the agenda and the preparation. Like, answer those questions in their heads.
I think, one of the most interesting things that we've learned along this journey, right? And I have this wonderful mentor who reminds me on a regular basis, if you've met one person with autism or with a neurodiversity, you've met one person. It doesn't present the same way in everybody. So thinking about that as you have interactions, painting with a broad brush is quicker, but those intentional brush strokes take more time and more thought. So going back to what we were talking about before and really getting to know a person on your team, what works for you, what doesn't, what type of feedback, how do you like to receive feedback? What's the best way to interact? What tools do you need for success? Are all great things to ask, and don't assume, right? Because you may know of someone's diagnosis or you may not. Ask the questions, because something works for one person doesn't mean it's going to work for something else. So be intentional about how you manage.
Well, and that takes vulnerability, doesn't it? But I mean, you started with that. I mean, it takes courage to lean in and ask those questions because you're putting yourself out there.
It does, and I think you have to honor, the responses you get from the people that you're asking, right? It's, if you're given 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you said you should listen twice as much as you speak. So if people are bothering to take the time and say, this is what works for me, you better bother to pay attention and live that with them every day. And they should be able to call you on it if you're not, right? And you should be able to, give them that feedback as well to say, you told me you prefer feedback like this. We're going to have, a little time to talk feedback on a project. And you've got to do it, I think, in the moment, as quickly as you can if that works for that person. But you also have to make sure you're not just doing it when things don't go as expected, but also when they go really well, because both are super important. I think, and that's true whether you're neurotypical or neurodiverse.
Yeah, it's such a good reminder. Just, again, like meeting every person where they are without assuming.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes to creating that culture of belonging, right? All the studies and all the readings that articles that are out there that say, people feel committed to a place that shares their values, that understands the type of people that they are and, what they want and what they want to achieve. And so if you can create an environment like that, I mean, retention, wow, forget about it, right? Like, it's amazing that because people go, I want to work here because I feel understood, I feel supported, and I feel like I matter.
So this business resource group launched in 2016. 88 people came to the first meeting. And so fast forward 8 years, tell us about the BRG today.
Oh my gosh. I feel like we're so lucky in this space because we went from gosh, I hope this resonates with people to it absolutely is. And so from 2016 to now, we have 14 chapters and we have people who are really passionate about all areas of inclusion and belonging when it comes to disability awareness. So what's great about it, I think, is a couple of things, right? You don't have to be a person who identifies as having a disability to be a member of the group. You can be an ally. You can be a caregiver. You can be someone who just wants to learn more and to say the right things. And we also think about, so with all of this collective passion and knowledge and, hundreds of people that belong to the BRG now, how do we take that and harness it into thinking about business services and solutions that we can do differently and look more like the people we serve?
That's incredible. 14 chapters. And I believe over 1,000 employees who are engaged in that around the world and growing.
When we first started, it was really more about building education and, even basic things like how do you refer to someone with a disability? Because language changes. What was okay 10 years ago, 5 years ago, may not be now. So that's one thing we do on a regular basis is to make sure that people know what are the words to choose when you want to show you're an ally, when you want to show that you're inclusive, and what should you no longer use. So that's huge.
What are the words that you should use?
It really depends on the topic that you're talking about. So we have a lot of great resources through Disability In and a number of other areas that, I think part of it is being intentional about not wanting to say the wrong thing. Sometimes keeps people from talking about it. So just a couple of tools to go, oh, you want to talk about this? Here's how you should phrase it. And making those generally available has really helped.
Amanda, I mentioned in my intro that I've been so fortunate to get to know you over the last few years. And so you are an incredible leader. You are very intentional. I mentioned you're always looking for how you can lift others. I see you doing that. And clearly this is very personal for you, given your son's diagnosis. So I'm really curious for you as a leader, how has this shaped how you show up and what's your biggest leadership lesson through this experience?
Narrowing it down to just one is very hard. But I think creating and opening the door for dialogue in a space where most people wouldn't have talked about this. I mean, even 10 years ago, I don't think people would have been really comfortable having a conversation saying, I've got a child who is neurodiverse. And what does that look like? And, at work, were very much like, I'm here to get the job done and, everything else kind of stays separate. And we know, right? You put a lot of time and energy into what you do at work and you spend a lot of time there. And so being able to have those authentic relationships and those authentic conversations with your coworkers saying, yep, I have to go to an individualized education plan meeting today. So I'm going to be gone from 2 to 3, but I'll be back online. And, that's okay. And your boss going, yep, totally okay. Fine. Let me know how that goes. Hope everything works for you. But I think if I really boil it down to the big learnings from this has been as a leader, if you open the door and say, I'm dealing with this, and this is something that my family has as part of our dynamic, boy, it opens the door for people to pick up the phone, send you an email and say, me too. And talk to me about what worked for you. Here's my situation. Or do you have 5 minutes? Because I think a diagnosis can feel, not always, but it can feel isolating sometimes. It can feel lonely. And what I would hope is that after folks talk to me, to members of our BRG, that they feel less so, they feel more included, and they feel like they know where they can go for additional help.
Right. Like I've got support around not in this alone, the comfort that brings. So what's the vision for this BRG and for this work for you?
I think, continuing to educate, create that sense of belonging, create that sense of education and understanding that really help people thrive. Because it's one thing to have, we've all had jobs, but it's another to have a vision for a long-term career. And ideally, everybody should be able to have that. So getting to that space and then getting to a place where we look around the table and go, yeah, we actually have some really good thoughts and perspectives here and can produce stronger, more impactful products and solutions as a result.
So I suspect there are listeners who are thinking, this would be really good for our organization. So what advice would you give to leaders within a business who want to bring others together to talk about neurodiversity at work, to create or launch a employee resource group? What advice would you give?
Do it. Don't let the fear of maybe doing something wrong stand in your way. But there's some great resources out there, whether it's, a professional group or people in your network who've done it before. I think there's such power in a tool like a LinkedIn to say, I'm thinking about doing this. Does anybody have experience? Boy, people will really come to your aid. And I think people want to see more of this type of discussion and they want to see you succeed.
Amanda, thank you for what you're doing. It's going to be fun to see this vision come to life and to see how this continues to evolve. So thank you for providing such foundational education. I mean, you've really helped me to, I think coming into this, I think it was weightier to me coming in than it is now. Like, it's just good leadership, which takes some of the pressure off.
That's what I hope people think, right? At the end of the day, people are not their diagnosis. It's one aspect of who they are. And so by being intentional as a leader and kind of figuring out what makes this person tick, what makes them succeed, what gets in their way, that all is, like you said, just good, authentic leadership.
And it's just care. It's caring enough to take the time to ask questions.
Yeah, it's kindness at work, right?
Right. Awesome. Well, if our listeners want to connect with you, what's the best place to do that?
Yeah, start with LinkedIn. I'm on that channel a bunch and I've learned so much from other people. I would love to be able to help and support however I can.
Yeah, and she will. She will pay attention to your needs and she will help to fill those. Yeah, thank you for being such a bright light. I can always count on you to uplift and encourage, always. That's what you do. That's what you do, my friend.
Takes one to know one, my friend.
Well, thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Andrea. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. Please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast to never miss a Being at Work story.